It's Wednesday, March 15, 2023, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the studio in the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are my colleagues Kiely and Earnest Perry. On our program this week, covering the Silicon Valley bank failure without creating panic among consumers. 2 weeks ago, he wasn't talking. Now Fox News media critic Howard Kurt says the case is a major test for the First Amendment. And after a lifetime in front of the camera, some teens are pushing back on their parents' social media habits. There's a lot more that hopefully we'll get to before our half hour is up today. But we'll start with Mike Pence making news Saturday night at the White Tie Gridiron Dinner in Washington, D.C. Kathy, you're a member of the Gridiron Club. You were there. What did he say, and how did it go over with the group?
Well, traditionally at the Gridiron, politicians make amusing remarks or try to be amusing. And then at the last few seconds of their speech, there's always an obligatory line about the importance of the press and the First Amendment. Mike Pence turned serious much earlier than expected, and he spoke at length about January 6th. He spoke about President Trump. He said history will judge President Trump. He also said that the president, which he has said before, endangered him and his family. But I think the very strong, very pointed remarks, obviously very deliberate, planned, premeditated, before the press audience was significant and surprising. I mean, I think these are all news people, so I think the first reaction was, wow, the Gridiron made news, which it has at times in the past, but not in the recent past. So that was interesting. The other thing he did was he very pointedly and at length went on about the importance of the free press, which obviously is not the sort of talking point that you would have expected of him when he was in the Trump administration. So I think this was a very clear and decisive break with Donald Trump, and it was newsy, and people recognize that fact. You could have heard a pin drop.
I was going to say, how did those remarks land, given the audience who was in the room, people who have been looking for him to say some of these statements in formal interviews or to share some of these things for going on more than 2 years now? How did it land with the people maybe even at your table or who you talked to afterward?
Yeah, well, I was sitting backstage with my pals in the press, and then I came out, as we often do. You'll see the reporters because there's a show that goes on, and I was sitting back with them. But we all come out for the speeches and stand on the sides of the ballroom. And I think the reaction, it's funny, the reaction is, wow, this is news. And that's what we started. We started looking to see if people would break the embargo. So it was really more along those lines. I don't think so.
Okay.
So normally you're not supposed to file until the dinner is over. But it was big news. And I think that's what people were talking about because we're all news professionals. All of the commentary about should he have said more, sooner, that I think
too little, too
we
late,
left that for
the
pundits the next day.
Okay. There's also been a call for an apology, though, to some of his comments. One of those jokes that didn't land so well. A joke he made about Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah, I mean, Buttigieg himself has kind of brushed that off, and I can see why. I mean, it was, as I say, this is an evening when politicians are supposed to be funny, and they don't always succeed. But he made a joke and said that I talked about Buttigieg having a child, and he took paternity leave after he and his partner adopted a baby, and then Pence went through the litany of all the transportation problems that we've had and said Buttigieg is the only person who could have a child, and everybody else has postpartum depression. I really didn't think that was a reference to his sexuality. I just thought it was a joke you could have made about anyone. It didn't land particularly well, but that's probably because Pence is not a professional comedian and can't deliver. But Buttigieg himself kind of brushed it off.
Yeah. I mean, I find out the part that I find interesting about Pence's his basically coming out and saying all these things about January 6th and talking about, he's, as you said, he's talked about his family being in danger and other things surrounding that. I think this was more of a message for the rest of the Republican Party, in particular other potential presidential candidates, more so than for Trump. I don't know if he sees Trump as a threat, but I do think that he sees the rest of the landscape, and he's trying to carve DeSantis
Kiely.
and other. He's trying to carve out a space, and maybe that space is somewhere center right, as opposed to where DeSantis is or where Haley is right now. And I think that it was more along those lines than actually going after his former boss.
Yeah, I think, Amy, when you talked about what was the reaction, I think if there was any sort of emotion in the press, it was kind of one of relief, because in the past, this has always been a place where Republicans and Democrats both come to these types of dinners, and they kind of make light of each other. It's kind of a roast of each other. They make pointed jokes. But the idea is they also joke about themselves. And to see a Republican doing that, I mean, because these dinners have been shunned by a lot of Republicans, these kind of opportunities. So to see somebody doing that and also allying himself with the press. Now, what people forget about Mike Pence is that when he was in the House of Representatives, he was the prime sponsor of the Reporters' Shield bill. So he has long been an ally of the press, and to see him sort of come back to the fold, I think, caused people to think, oh, okay, maybe we can have some allies on both sides of the aisle again. And so to the extent that there was an emotional response, I think it was relief.
But to me, again, I think that's Pence trying to create a space for himself that is different from the mega crowd, different from where Haley is going.
I'm that guy who can bring us back to the good old years. If the good old years were the Bush administration or the Reagan administration, like where we could at least have those conversations, even if our ideologies were different.
And he clearly did not have a space in MAGA world.
No.
I mean, so it makes sense for him to try to do this, to carve another path for himself.
The question becomes, and if I do find it interesting that he did it at the Gridiron, because I think what he's basically saying is he's going to the press and saying to them, hey, I'm going to be a different kind of Republican candidate than you've had to deal with over the course of the last two elections.
Yeah, I think the audience was absolutely calculated. I heard, among other Gridiron members, that Pence was really eager to give this speech. So I think it was, yes, I think you're absolutely right. He was making that point.
Okay, well, so Sunday morning after that dinner, Fox News media critic Howard Kurtz broke his silence about the Fox Dominion lawsuit going on for 4 minutes in his show Sunday, refuting some of the claims made in the discovery that we've been reading about the past few weeks. And you can watch the full segment on our links blog at kbia.org. But the big headline is that the whole case is going to be a major test for the First Amendment, and Dominion has a lot to prove, because what he's saying is what we've been reading in those discovery documents don't tell the whole story. They're cherry-picked sound bites or things taken out of context.
Yeah, again, I mean, and I was talking to someone about this the other day.
Yeah.
The whole issue with the Dominion is what's going to actually wind up being allowed in the courtroom when the case makes it to trial. So we already see what's happening in the court of public opinion. What happens when the case is presented to the jury? What are the jury instructions? What are they going to be asked to do? That potentially could be a settlement here. You just don't know. So again, I mean, it's all interesting. It's great for television. It's great for people who want to dump on Fox. But in the end, where's this actually going to go?
I think Howard would have been better off to keep his mouth shut.
Stay with what he was saying a couple weeks ago and let it go.
Instead of it, this looks so self-serving to Fox.
It looks like it's their public rebuttal in the court of public opinion.
It looks like
exactly.
Okay, it is the rebuttal in the court of public opinion, and using his show to do it.
Yeah.
Exactly, 100%. So, I mean, and this is, to the point that Fox is going to make here, the idea that the First Amendment should protect them in telling lies. I think that's the kind of thing, as somebody who is a defender of the free press, I worry when people use those kind of defenses, because I don't want the First Amendment to be cheapened. And I don't think any right is absolute. And so if you cheapen the First Amendment by saying we're going to use it to defend lies and slander, and some of the internet service providers do the same thing, it's going to make it more likely that there will be a backlash against free speech. So I think everybody needs to be responsible, and I really dislike this defense quite a bit.
I'm with you. It would be very damaging to everything that's been built up in terms of, press law, sunshine laws, FOIA, all of that falls into danger when you have the ability to basically say, well, I didn't really mean it at the time, but, it was going to help me in my bottom line, so that's why I did it. Because that's, at least from the information that we've seen so far, that's basically what we're talking about here, is that they made a choice to go down that road because
for financial
reasons.
Okay. So speaking of financial choices, and I don't know that this was a choice, because Friday night, regulators posted the notice on the front door of the Silicon Valley Bank. The bank failed. How did it happen? Well, this regional bank in Santa Clara, California, had held a high percentage of government bonds. And when the Federal Reserve raised interest rates, the values of those bonds went down quickly. So the bank's management announced that it was going to try to raise some money, which sparked a run on the bank as depositors sought to pull their money out of it. Well, that led to a bunch of stories over the weekend while the funds were frozen, leading people both in that region in California and really across the country to worry about whether their regional or their local banks were about to face the same type of a situation. And it raises this really important question: how do journalists responsibly report in a moment like that to limit the amount of consumer panic, to help people understand what's happening and what is or isn't at stake?
Well, to me, the scary thing was when this first came out and it was first reported, you started hearing bank run, too big to fail, too small to fail, too regional to fail. I mean, all of the terms that we heard back in 2008, you want to scare people, you use that language. I mean, that was the thing that sort of concerned me. It was like, whoa,
and I hear bank run, I start thinking of the Depression and like lines.
Exactly. And that was the thing that I was going like, whoa, wait a minute. We're talking, I know we're talking about the 16th largest bank in the country, but it is a regional bank. What steps that were put in place after 2008, how are those things going to help to minimize whatever damage that can be caused by this bank going under? Those were not a part of some of the initial stories. It was more of that language of catastrophe and images of 2008, images of the 1930s that people were sort of seeing. And I also do think that, the fact that many people were looking at this on social media, getting that little snippet, that kind of language sort of resonates with people. And they were really concerned, at least the Biden administration was concerned about it basically leading to more and more financial issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, I got to say, this has been I told you so week for Elizabeth Warren. I mean, to the point that Earnest made, these banks, including regional banks, the Banking Association made a huge lobbying effort to get some of the post-2008 regulations turned back. And it's hard not to see that had an impact here with these regional banks who did not have to meet the regulatory standards that were set after 2008 and did not have to undergo the stress tests. And yes, regulation is a pain, but if we are going to insure depositors, the government has the right to ask for that. And the banks complained and whined and, this is too burdensome for us. And now we see what's happened. So Elizabeth Warren had a really interesting interesting op-ed in the New York Times over the weekend, and she's been interviewed multiple times, and it'll be interesting to see if that has any impact. But I do think that the panic is in large part because of what you mentioned, Earnest, just seeing a snippet or a headline, because I think from, even during the weekend, people were emphasizing these. Certainly the Silicon Valley Bank was kind of a special case because of the clientele it had, a much more risky, risk-prone clientele.
And then the other bank was connected to crypto, which we've been talking about, and the issues that have been there.
So I think if people understand that, but I think getting back, the really interesting political fallout to me is going to be, the "I told you so" crowd, which seems to have a real reason to say that.
Well, and so as loud as the "I told you so" crowd, not surprisingly, so I'm going to say that right now, Earnest, because I can hear you say, and this surprises you, why? But equally as loud is the Fox News crowd and the Tucker Carlsons of the world, quite literally Tucker Carlson, who said last night that this is the result of the DEI requirements that were put in the 2008 right.
What?
He's shaking his head, radio audience. Now you're understanding my response. That is, we also talk about the what Fox is facing with the Dominion lawsuit, that we're not seeing any even change in temporary behavior here, because we're taking facts and we're spinning them. What
facts are you talking about? I mean,
well, that those DEI requirements were part of the 2008 bank bailout.
And we should probably say DEI stands for diversity, inclusion, and equity. Yeah.
But that's not what caused a bank to fail, right? That fact exists, right? That was a requirement if the federal government was going to help you.
Yes.
That you had to serve and employ communities of your entire community, right? And be inclusive of the community. That's not what caused the bank to fail. No. And what they're also not covering is the number of banks that failed during the Trump administration as well. Banks were failing then too.
And to get back to my point, it was the Trump administration that pushed to roll back the regulations that would demand that banks have a certain amount of capital, that would demand they can handle a stress test. So, I mean, I think that, this gets to, the media point here, which is, if I kind of know what you're going to say before you open your mouth, why would I tune in to listen to you?
Right.
And it's just a question of what crazy reason is Tucker going to find to blame this on the people he loves to hate. And so it's not, this is going to happen. And so I wonder how long the audience stays. I mean, maybe if you're a diehard and you just want to hear your own,
if you want to wallow in that,
your own confirmation bias,
your own confirmation, exactly.
But there's no, as Earnest would say, there's no surprise here. It's just like what wacky reason are you going to come up with? I mean, to associate affirmative action with
bank failure.
A bank failure is
but
really
to me,
a stretch.
I think what's happening now. I mean, in the aftermath of it, starting on Monday when Biden himself came out and basically said, "Look, we're financially sound. We're going to make sure that all parties are taken care of here," which is also very controversial because they're talking about they're going to actually use money from the FDIC to cover over and above $250,000, which is going to be very controversial. I can see some hearings coming out over that, but they're not going to hold shareholders or bank executives accountable, and they're actually going to start investigating them.
No, they are going to hold them accountable. They're not going to protect the shareholders.
Thank you. They're not going to protect them. They're not going to get their money back. And now they're starting to investigate the fact that you had various people working at the bank, people who were in charge of the bank, who had sold shares and done other things prior to this happening, and now the SEC and others are investigating that. Those are the stories that are starting to come out now, and those are the stories that need to be investigated. And as of today, it looks as if the stock market is rebounding away in a direction that people feel much more comfortable about where things are going. So in that regard, I think the media has done a very good job. The question now becomes, do they continue to follow this, or are we going to just sort of push this over to the side and not pay attention to it, which is something that I think Elizabeth Warren was talking about over the weekend, is that here's an opportunity. We need to make sure we stay on top of this.
Okay, so let's bring it a little bit closer to home, to a hyper-local publication making a pretty big decision. The Maneater, which is the student-run newspaper here on Mizzou's campus, announced that it will cease publication of its print edition later this spring. And there have been a lot of people, many of them alumni from our own program in decades past, who are very upset about this decision. They see it as a sign that the journalism is somehow not as good if it's not on printed paper. I, for one, I want to applaud the students for making what seems to be a sound business decision. And this kind of goes back to one of the things we talked about last week about millennials and Gen Z paying for news in different outlets than might be traditional. They recognize their audience is 18 to 24, and their audience isn't picking up that print edition that's all over campus. There are a lot of money, a lot of resources, paper, ink that goes into that, redirected into the journalism.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, this is an issue that continues to face student journalists, especially on college campuses. I mean, many college campuses have converted to digital only and did it years ago. Right now, I have a guest here at the J School, Gabriel Tate, who is
we're waving to him.
We're waving to him as we talk now. He's at Ball State. They have a 100-year-old newspaper that has been publishing for that long. They also have a digital operation. They're in discussions about whether or not they need to continue the digital operation. I mean, the print operation as things shift more digital. Again, like you said, we talked about this last week. Not just the generation that's in college now, but the generations that have graduated have already switched to digital.
Well, in a lot of the places where they're working. I'm even thinking about the generation of students that comes up after this group. They're going to be even less inclined to pick up a print edition. One of the other thoughts I had is the Maneater does tremendous multimedia work, and you can't play video or you can't play video or audio on a piece of paper.
Yeah, I think Anna Coletto, and full disclosure, the editor-in-chief of the Maneater, is taking a class from me, but she did a really good job explaining the reasons behind the decision and the painfulness of it, because even for this generation of students, there's a real romance to the ink on paper, the late-night press nights. But I think the students did a really good job of not letting nostalgia stand in the way of journalism, and I think the point you made, Amy, is really important. First of all, we're able to tell stories in many different ways, and the digital platform showcases that. The second thing is the money needs to go into the journalism, not into the paper, not into the ink, not into the superstructure that you have to have for delivery. And when we know, particularly now for the Missourian, it's different. We still have an audience that takes that paper in paper, and the ads pay for that. But I think gradually you're going to see even established legacy news organizations, and we already are, moving more and more in this direction. Yeah,
I mean, I do think that it also sort of frees up the Maneater to be able to go out and promote in those digital spaces, to be able to say, hey, if you want to get the latest news and information about what's going on campus.
And it will enable them to attract talent.
Absolutely.
That wants to do that kind of work.
And present it in so many different ways.
Right, and you raise a good point. The Maneater today, I think when I was a college student here in the very late 90s, the Maneater was a twice-a-week print publication. Right. Today it's down, I believe, to once a month.
Right.
And so by moving fully digital, they can keep those websites, those apps updated on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, and continue to be reporting there. I will say I also exchanged a series of Instagram direct messages with Anna over the weekend because she saw an Instagram story I had posted trying to talk down some of either past students or past classmates and be like, whoa, think about this for a second. Isn't this exactly what's happening in your newsrooms? Why wouldn't they have these conversations? And she's excited. She is, as you say, talking about the nostalgia, but appreciating the support she's getting from those who see the need for this from a business standpoint.
We are at the University of Missouri, we're all about preparing students for their future jobs, and their future jobs are not going to be putting ink on paper in most cases. I think there's a place for print, but it's a far smaller place than it used to be.
Okay, so as we talk about the Gen Zers and how they're also using social media, there was an interesting story, actually two of them, one that was in Teen Vogue, one that was in The Guardian, and really taking a look at how Gen Z is reacting to how some members of Gen Z are reacting to a lifetime in front of the camera, and how some are really resentful now as they approach their mid to late teens that their entire lives their parents have been posting on social media. And the piece in The Guardian that you can see on our links blog literally said it should be illegal for parents to put their kids out there as heavily as they are. Now, I'm going to say I don't have children. Kathy, you don't have kids. Ernest, let me ask you about this, because I know with kids and with grandkids, some of this is touchy.
It is touchy.
Looking at you, Earnest.
Yeah, it is touchy. Hey, I mean, I get it. I understand. Good luck with that, because parents are going to do what they're going to do. Grandparents, I can tell you from my own experience, are going to do what they're going to do. I do think that that there needs to be some sort of thought put behind it in terms of what parents should put out there on social media. We usually confine ours within our own space, and it's not to be viewed or sent out in a public way.
I get that part. The texting or group texts within the family or WhatsApp groups of photos or videos and sharing that way. I also hear, like in the Teen Vogue article, some stories of kids who are saying, like, I never consented to this, and my parents have been posting this and profiting off of me for the last 16 years, and I don't want this out there.
Well,
go ahead.
This isn't all that new, really.
No, it's
I mean,
not.
I hate to tell the Gen Zers, but people have been going through this ever since they were going out on their first prom date, and Dad brings down the little embarrassing first potty pictures, etc. So,
but the whole world didn't have access to them.
Well, that's true, but I will say it's a little bit hard for me to sympathize with a generation that's trying to be influencers and putting their own stuff out on the internet all the time, suddenly getting sensitive about their parents. Having said that, I think we're all learning about the implications of living out loud in public, and everybody, I think, is going to have to ratchet back. I, like Earnest, I don't have kids of my own, but I have a beloved niece and nephew. But because I'm a journalist, I've always been very cognizant when I post a picture to keep it within a small private group. So I think everybody is learning at the same time with this.
Okay, well, that music means we are out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for spending your last half hour with us. Read more about each of our topics on our links blog under both the programs and podcast tabs at kbia.org. We're also wherever you get your podcast downloads, including iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle there is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to the program again, leave comments, questions, see what we'll be talking about next week, and more. Thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan for directing the show, to Kia Thomas for handling the audio. Tim Pilcher composed our original theme music. I'm Amy Simons. Be sure to join us again next week when we're back with you for another edition of Views of the News.